Hello, I'm Robin Fertel, licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, I want to talk to you about a topic that has received so much talk in our society and in therapy, and that is on self-esteem. Now, there's a lot of interest right now in trying to understand what self-esteem means. I know because I have many clients who are parents that think that the way to give their children self-esteem is by praising them and praising them often. But that often comes from a lack of clarity of what they're really producing in their children. Most likely, what parents want for their children is to have self-worth. That makes sense. So really, what we're going to talk about is self-worth and the difference between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem is something that you give to somebody to elevate his or herself, whereas self-worth is something that is inherently present already in you. You see the difference? Any of us, or any of you who are parents, can see within your child that there is a person, a spirit or a soul, some people call it. But even if you're parents, if you're not parents, maybe if you've had an animal, you've also seen within that animal that there is a being or a spirit and a soul. And that's where you find out who that animal or that person really is. Whether you believe in spirituality or not, it doesn't matter. Even if you just believe in genetics, within that human being is a person, and that person has inherent self-worth. So let me ask you, would you love your child any more or less if they accomplished something or if they did something wrong? No, of course not. You love your child always. Your love for your child remains the same because you love them for who they are, not what they do or they don't do. So it's the same sort of thing if you have an animal. For example, if you had a dog that you love, you wouldn't think the dog was less than if the dog didn't perform a trick for you, or if the dog went to the bathroom on the floor. You might be angry at the dog, right? Yeah. But you wouldn't think that the dog was worth less because the dog had an inherent being. You love the dog for who they are. Hope I'm making sense here. Children have an inherent being, as does every single human being. So what happens then when you try and give someone self-esteem through too much praise? I'm going to give you an example because I see this all the time. So if a child is learning how to perform certain things to please the parent, somehow the child is good enough. So for example, say you're constantly praising your child for their good grades. And you think that by praising them, good job for your A, good job for your B, good job, you're giving them self-esteem, which is true. You are giving them self-esteem. The child feels better about him or herself based on what you're saying because of their accomplishments that are coming from the outside. But then what happens is that there is too much praise. When the child becomes an adult, guess what? They're going to constantly need the same praise from someone else, their coworkers or their husband or their wife or their partner or their children, to feel like they're good enough. Otherwise, without the praise, they're going to feel like the only way they have self-worth or self-esteem is when they accomplish something that's so-called good. But then, when they do something that's considered bad, then somehow they see themselves as a bad person. So too much praise is not what promotes self-worth. It promotes self-esteem. Okay. The problem with self-esteem is that self-esteem can be taken away from you if you make a mistake. Self-worth is different. With self-worth, what you're doing is you're telling the child that who they are on the inside is what matters. So the message is, I love you for who you are, not what you do. That is really important that children get that message. For example, if they get a good grade, right? Instead of saying, wow, good job, I'm so proud of you, which I hear all the time, which isn't a bad thing to say, remember that. But they're still being rewarded for what they are from the grade. You can instead ask the question, What did you do to get that grade? Tell me about the work that you put into it. See the difference? And then you ask the child, after the child answers you, what do you think about the grade that you got? When you do that, you will be absolutely amazed. The child is learning through talking to you about who they are and about what they've actually accomplished from the inside, internal motivation, instead of you constantly giving it to them. What children need to learn is that they already have self-worth. If they get a good grade or they make a great accomplishment in life, yes, they can feel good about it. But that doesn't mean that they're better than someone else or better than they were before. At the same time, if they make a mistake or they do something that they shouldn't do, they might feel embarrassed about what they did, but they don't feel less than. Do you see? Self-esteem is something that can be given and taken away, whereas self-worth is always within you throughout your entire life. You have inherent self-worth, which is self-worth coming from the inside of who you are. I'd love to share with you a couple of examples of clients I've had to demonstrate these exact points. I remember I had a male client who was, in a way, the hero of his family. He was the oldest child of 5, and others in his family, especially his parents, constantly praised him. He got really good grades in school. He was an athlete. He then went on in his adult life to be a professional athlete. And he felt really good about himself, right? He had a lot of self-esteem. So one would say he had good self-esteem. Well, unfortunately, he got injured and had to stop playing his professional sport very early, actually much earlier than some of his colleagues. So he actually plummeted in a very bad depression because his entire life he was the star. He was the hero. But now, because he lost his profession, that sense he had about himself was being taken away from him. So his self-esteem was coming from what he did, not for who he was. So he actually went into a big existential crisis about this. And his question was, who am I if I'm not the hero in this sport or the hero in my life? Who am I if I let off the cape and I'm no longer a hero? This man had great parents, but they tried to do what was good for him, and they were constantly praising him. They were well-meaning for his grades, for the sports he was playing, always telling him that he was the best. And then when he wasn't the best, he did not know how to feel good about himself. So he had to learn who he was apart from what he did. He came to see me, and we worked through a lot about what self-worth really means and who a person really is from the inside, who he really was. He began to discover parts of himself that he had never seen before. It was amazing, such as being able to accept the fact that he's human and he makes mistakes. He was never okay with that. He was also able to put new meaning in his life, and he started being of great service, unbelievable, in another area that he never even thought he was good at. He finally realized that he didn't even really enjoy playing the sport that he was playing, that he identified with as a hero his whole life, although he was really good at it. What he enjoyed was the praise that he got from the sport and the reward of the money and the celebrity of being in the sport. Because he really didn't enjoy the sport, he actually ended up being a lot happier when he found out who he really was, that inherent self-worth. The light sort of turned on when he changed jobs, and he was more focused on the service work that he was doing, which was much more in line and in tune for who he really was apart from the hero. That's a great example of well-meaning parents praising a child and then him feeling pressured to get into that specific sport because of all the praise he got. But then when the praise stopped, he felt like he was nothing. That is a great example. Okay, another example of this, but on the other end, is that a client that I had a decent upbringing, no big trauma per se, However, both of her parents worked away from home a lot. Oftentimes, she came home from school by herself and let herself in and had a lot of free time on her own. She was an only child, and she got the feeling that she didn't matter, that somehow, because no attention was being paid to her, that on the inside she felt invisible, like she didn't matter. And that's the feeling she described, invisible. As an adult, the relationships that she chose, guess what, would very much mirror those relationships from her early childhood. She would often pick relationships, both with her friends and with romantic partners, who actually were more neglectful of her. You only can pick what you're used to. They would have more intensity outside of her, so they would make other things a lot more important than her, which was very familiar to her from her childhood. It was a replay of her childhood. The message she was constantly perceiving was, you're not enough. You're not enough. You're not enough. So she worked really hard at what she thought was making herself perfect. She wanted to have the perfect body size, according to her, the perfect hairdo, the makeup, everything perfect, perfect, perfect. She was trying to make up, trying to be good enough. She went on to get a degree and tried so hard to feel like she was enough. But no matter what she did or how much she accomplished or who she was with, she always felt like she was invisible. And she would say over and over again in therapy, I don't belong, I don't fit in, I'm not enough. And then she'd also find partners again, and friends, not just partners, that would make her not feel important. So she had this feeling, which in therapy world we call low self-esteem. And the self-esteem she thought she was trying to get through people, places, things, situations, it was never enough. Even though she was on the other end of high self-esteem, she had little self-esteem. When we worked together, we did not concentrate on self-esteem. Throw that out the window. We concentrated on who she was, that inherent worth, and that who she was on the inside was enough, and that her value came from within herself, and her weaknesses and strengths didn't make her less or better than. We talked about those weaknesses and strengths, and we really emphasized that her weaknesses, again, did not make her less than other people, and at the same time her strengths didn't make her better than, but that she was a person that had inherent self-worth. That's where self-worth was invaluable, because, happy to report now, she has enough self-respect and enough self-worth, listen to this now, to consciously and unconsciously is 80% of our brain, choose people that were available for her and not like what she had experienced in her childhood, where something was always more important than her. So as you see, when we talk about self-esteem, what we really want to focus on is self-worth, the internal, the inside, inherent worth, that all we have to do is just show up as who we are. All we have to do is show up as just who we are, and that is enough.